would like to investigate some contemporary issues in respect to racism using a title for this short talk, Blasphemy versus White Fragility. The term blasphemy evidently comes to English from Greek, blasphemeo. Blasphemy, I understand, is not in practice strongly prohibited within the UK. Many people see the reason for the failure of that prohibition being that we are these days liberated and we are these days secular. We don't need to worry about things like blasphemy. And it appears that the failure to condemn blasphemy has brought us no particular issues. In other words, life goes on. People seem to be thriving, even though any blasphemous threats are to a large extent ignored in UK, in much of the Western world, in much of the world that follows the example and the instruction of the West. This doesn't apply to all parts of the world. I'm given to understand that a blasphemy law is strongly upheld in certain places, for example in Egypt. I gather from personal conversations that if an Egyptian Christian approaches a Muslim and tells him about Jesus, he's liable to be imprisoned for 5 years. Now we can say, well, the Egyptians obviously are primitive and not very liberated. Maybe they're not just getting things, not understanding what they should be doing. But yet we might also ask, can this blasphemy law be in place without cause? Are those people just plain foolish? Or could it be that they're seeing something important that some of us in the West are missing? One might ask, how can such a foundational principle that has in different parts of the world in much of history been strongly upheld, today just be ignored without any loss of functionality, without any kind of drawbacks? Now, DiAngelo is these days a well-known author. Her book talks about white fragility. She says, for example, on page 110, probing forbidden racial issues results in verbal incoherence, digressions, long pauses, repetition and self-corrections on the part of white people who are questioned regarding racial issues that are usually not openly discussed. She considers the fragility of white people in the face of those kind of questions to be a kind of bullying. She even talks about white people, particularly white women, using emotion like crying in order to force the case of white domination. How do we understand all this? I believe that many whites in the West today consider their own beliefs, their own understanding to be rational and reasonable. Thus they struggle to find someone who appears to be intelligent who doesn't agree with them in this rational way of thinking. Now, a particularly prominent group of people apparently in USA who often don't agree with them, according to DiAngelo, are the blacks. So then whites struggle. What's wrong with them? They can't all be foolish. Why don't they get what we're saying, which seems pretty evident? Now, some years ago, that supposed ignorance was credited to genetics. And some people still credit it to genetics. I don't believe that to be the case. And to credit genetics for people's not understanding is these days considered to be racism and is very much condemned. Some of the blacks who struggle with white domination and with white worldviews appear to be very intelligent. Why do they not get what the whites are saying? I believe this is the source of white fragility. Incredulity at how another people could be not understanding what to many whites in the West just seems obvious. Now, in a recent exchange I had, a discussion I had on Facebook on racial issues, the ethnic minorities, let's put it that way, who I was discussing with, used this notion of white fragility to bring our discussion to a not healthy end. In other words, they interpreted my own contribution as a reflection of white fragility. This resulting in a stagnation of, rather than a further elaboration in depth of, discussion regarding issues of race, racism, and anti-racism. So then, who is right? Are the whites correct in the position that they hold? Or are the blacks, who apparently consider them to be fragile, the correct ones, and the whites need to apologize and withdraw and change their direction? Well, in a manner of speaking, of course, we can say both are right, but they are missing something important. One important thing that is often missed is the historical impact of positivism on today's thinking. Now, Comte is renowned as having been the founder of positivism. Many scholars today acknowledge or consider that positivism is no longer legitimate. It's been undermined theoretically. But despite that theoretical undermining, which happened, let's say, in the 1970s, positivism continues to have an enormous impact on today's contemporary society, and frankly is presupposed by many Western people. So positivism claims that contemporary Western rationality is built on a firm foundation of on a firm theoretical foundation, let's put it that way, that there is reason and logic at the base of today's Western thinking that has brought us things like science, technology, objectivity, and so forth. Now, because positivism has been undermined, fortunately or unfortunately, I think that is a wrong supposition. In other words, there is no clear, logical foundation for the way contemporary Westerners engage their rationality. Now there you can see why the fragility arises. In the classic case looked at by DiAngelo, the blacks are challenging what to the whites they're talking to should be just obvious, should be just clear, should be just accepted by everybody. But if indeed there's no rational foundation for today's rationality, as the critiques of positivism would assert, then where is a justification going to come from? So in another sense we can say, well, yeah, whites may be right. They kind of know how to prosper because positivism presumably can be seen as having made a contribution to today's ways of life, and those ways of life to which positivism has contributed seem to be prosperous. But yet there's no absolute way of demonstrating the rightness of positivism. There's no way of justifying it foundationally. If you attempt to justify, as a result, let's say modernity and modern ways of life, to someone who doesn't implicitly already have a foundation, the foundation that white Western people derive from their particular history, you can't do it. So we have two choices. Either there can be no foundation for anything, in which case life is really just a chaotic going about, getting what you can and doing what you can. Or, now here's an important place to look for a foundation, that if the foundation, or as the foundation is not in positivism, the foundation for today's modernity must be found in theology. Now DiAngelo has beaten the theologians. The positivists, of course, were constantly attacking the theologians. The ongoing momentum of positivism contributes to anti-clericalism. In today's Western societies, there are a good number of people who do not value theology or its contribution, and do not even see the sense in theology or its contribution, despite the fact that they are standing on a theological foundation built by their predecessors, which was built in such a way as subsequently to enable people like Comte to devise positivism, and that positivism deceived people for many years until it was discredited, but even having been discredited, it still deceives people. So the only foundation that we're left with on which to argue the kinds of issues that DiAngelo points us to is a theological foundation. Now, of course, we don't have to argue in another sense. The foundation on which today's Western life was built is there. It's the tradition of the church, it's the Bible, it's the history that has happened even pre-Christian times, but certainly post-Christian times in the last 2,000 years. So a key question is, how did today's prosperity arise from the Bible? Now that question in formal circles in the West today is hardly addressed. In fact, it's considered a non-question. And increasingly, in order to justify today's secular foundation on which people continue to build, in effect a positivistic foundation, this question has been denied. Yet the very denial of that question results then in the fragility that DiAngelo identifies. So there's two questions really. How has theology contributed to where we are today? And how should theology, our understanding of God, be a part of assisting people, say, from outside of the West to grasp where the West is, or to undermine where the West is? If the foundation on which contemporary Western philosophy, let's say, is building is not theologically legitimate, that should be made plain. Clearly then, theological discussion is needed in order to clarify those issues that these days result in white fragility. Essentially, the white fragility is a result of blasphemy. In other words, it's a result of making implicit accusations of the non-legitimacy of the position held by whites who themselves have failed or are failing to perceive a theological foundation for what they believe. Thinking that positivism is a sufficient foundation when it is not. A vital imperative in today's world is to bring theological justifications to contemporary life, and the source from which that must happen is the Christian scriptures, is the Bible, the tradition and the history of the church. Thank you very much.